You've been lied
What
to
does this
about the most
mean?
common mental
Let me
health
check this other
condition on the
book.
planet. For decades, a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical machine,
The cerebrum controls
well-meaning but
thinking and movement.
outdated
The
medical
frontal lobe is for
professionals,
decision. The
and a
mask of
society
suppression conceals our
terrified of
true feelings.
uncomfortable emotions have fed you a heavily sanitized, easily marketable version of depression. They told you it was a simple plumbing problem in your brain. They
Signs of
told you it
emotional
looked like
isolation,
someone
depressive
crying in a
states in
dark
adult
room.
patients. The
They
simplistic
told you a
cure often
little white
addresses symptoms,
pill
not
or a walk
causes.
in
The
the
holistic
woods was
approach
the
promotes
ultimate
long-term health
cure.
through. The
But
old
the
diagram
modern
shows a simplified
understanding of
view of chemical
depression
imbalance. The
isn't
modern
just
understanding
slightly
reveals
different from
complex,
what you were
dysregulated neural
taught.
networks.
It shatters the entire foundation of how we treat human suffering. We've built an entire industry on metaphors instead of medicine, and it's time to tear it down. Here are the 42 lies about depression that science has finally exposed. 1. You've been told depression is just a chemical imbalance in your brain. You believe it's a simple lack of serotonin that just needs a top-up, like putting oil in a car. Every pharmaceutical commercial since the late 90s, well-meaning doctors, and high school health classes have repeated this as undeniable scientific fact. The chemical imbalance theory is fundamentally flawed and lacks conclusive scientific backing. A massive, comprehensive 2022 review of decades of research found no clear evidence that depression is caused by low serotonin activity. While medications modifying serotonin can help some people, the brain isn't a simple soup needing a pinch of chemicals. It involves a wildly complex interplay of neuroplasticity, trauma, environment, and genetics. This neat, highly marketable concept was heavily pushed by pharmaceutical companies in the 1980s and 1990s to sell SSRIs. It was an easy metaphor that helped destigmatize the condition by medicalizing it, but it intentionally oversimplified a profoundly complex human experience for profit. Turns out, your brain isn't a faulty chemistry set. It's just a lot more complicated than a 30-second pill commercial wanted you to believe. 2. You've been told depression is just severe sadness. You believe that if someone isn't crying, they can't possibly be depressed. Hollywood movies, literature, and our basic cultural vocabulary consistently equate depression with weeping and visible misery. Depression is often characterized by a complete absence of feeling, not overwhelming sadness. Anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, and a profound, heavy numbness are actually the most common core symptoms for chronic sufferers. When early psychiatrists began classifying mood disorders, they relied heavily on outward expressions of melancholia, missing the silent internal void that many patients couldn't articulate. This observational bias became the clinical standard. So, the most depressed person in the room usually isn't the one crying. They're the one who forgot how to care that they aren't. 3. You've been told you need a specific, tragic reason to be depressed. You believe that if your life is objectively good, your depression is just you being ungrateful. Parents, self-help gurus, and even our own internal monologues reinforce the idea that depression is a reaction to a specific negative event. Clinical depression frequently strikes without any identifiable trigger or environmental cause. The disease affects the brain's ability to regulate mood independent of external circumstances, meaning you can have a perfect job, a loving family, and still feel entirely hollow. The human brain evolved to solve problems, so when society saw people suffering, it demanded a tangible why, leading to the false belief that trauma is a prerequisite for illness. Turns out, your brain doesn't care about your six-figure salary or your nice house when its neurocircuitry decides to go offline. 4. You've been told antidepressants are happy pills. You believe these medications instantly elevate your mood and make the world look bright and sunny. Pop culture references and sloppy media reporting constantly portray antidepressants as euphoric drugs that artificially induce joy. Antidepressants do not create happiness. They merely raise the baseline of functioning to a point where a person can begin to do the work of getting better. Most SSRIs actually have a blunting effect, meaning they don't just reduce the extreme lows, they also shave off the extreme highs, leaving the patient feeling functional but sometimes emotionally muted. The media loved the narrative of a quick-fix wonder drug, and early press coverage of drugs like Prozac leaned heavily into the miracle cure angle to boost readership and sales. So, they don't give you rose-colored glasses, they just stop you from actively drowning. 5. You've been told depression is a sign of mental weakness or lack of willpower. You believe that if you just tried harder, exercised more, and thought positively, you could beat it. Hustle culture, fitness influencers, and generations of stoic grandparents have preached that mental illness is just a failure of character. Depression physically alters the structure of the brain, shrinking the hippocampus and impairing the prefrontal cortex. You cannot out-willpower a structural change in your brain's gray matter any more than you can think your way out of a broken leg. The concept of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is deeply embedded in Western individualism, making it easier for society to blame the sick than to address systemic health issues. Turns out, your willpower isn't weak. Your neurobiology is literally operating in survival mode. 6. You've been told that talking about your depression will always make it better. You believe that getting it all out is the ultimate path to healing. Well-meaning friends, school counselors, and awareness campaigns constantly push the mantra to just reach out and talk. Endlessly rehashing negative feelings without structured therapeutic guidance can actually deepen depression through a process called rumination. Venting strengthens the neural pathways associated with despair, effectively practicing the emotion of depression until your brain gets better at it. The early days of psychoanalysis popularized the catharsis theory, the idea that emotions act like steam in a pressure cooker, which sounds logical but completely ignores how neural plasticity actually works. So, complaining to your friends for 3 hours isn't therapy. It's just giving your depression a microphone. 7. You've been told you can spot a depressed person by how they look. You believe they'll be wearing sweatpants, avoiding eye contact, and looking disheveled. Stock photos, television dramas, and outdated corporate mental health training videos consistently use the same visual stereotypes. High-functioning depression is incredibly common, and many sufferers are high-achieving, immaculately dressed professionals. The energy required to mask the illness is enormous, meaning the person smiling the brightest at the office might be in the deepest pain behind closed doors. Society historically locked away the visibly mentally ill, creating a cultural blind spot for the millions who suffer quietly while remaining economically productive. Turns out, depression doesn't have a dress code, and it definitely knows how to wear a suit. 8. You've been told that children don't get depressed. You believe childhood is a carefree time and kids are immune to complex mood disorders. For decades, the psychiatric establishment and parents alike dismissed childhood mental health struggles as phases, growing pains, or behavioral issues. Children can and do experience severe clinical depression, though it often presents as irritability, anger, or unexplained physical aches, rather than classic adult sadness. Mid-20th century developmental psychology mistakenly believed children lacked the ego development necessary to experience true depression, a devastating error that left generations of kids untreated. So, your kid isn't just throwing a tantrum. They might be fighting a battle you didn't even know they were allowed to have. 9. You've been told that going for a run is just as effective as medication. You believe a runner's high can outpace clinical psychiatric symptoms. Fitness gurus and lifestyle influencers loudly proclaim that hitting the gym is the only prescription you need. While exercise is an excellent supplementary tool, it is wholly insufficient as a standalone treatment for moderate to severe clinical depression. For someone experiencing profound psychomotor retardation, where moving limbs feels like moving through wet concrete, telling them to just go for a jog is medically obtuse. This myth stems from the wellness industry weaponizing studies on mild, temporary sadness and inappropriately applying those results to severe clinical populations. Turns out, burpees are great for your glutes, but they aren't going to fix a dysfunctional prefrontal cortex. 10. You've been told depression is a modern, first-world invention. You believe it's just a byproduct of smartphones and soft modern living. Grumpy internet commentators and traditionalist sociologists love to claim that our ancestors were too busy surviving to be sad. Depression has been documented in medical texts for thousands of years, across completely different cultures and civilizations. Ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates wrote extensively about melancholia, attributing it to an excess of black bile, proving the condition is a deeply ingrained human vulnerability, not a new trend. The narrative that depression is a modern weakness was popularized by 20th-century cultural critics who conflated rising diagnostic rates with a rise in actual disease occurrence. So, no, iPhones didn't invent depression, they just gave us a faster way to complain about it. 11. You've been told changing your diet is a guaranteed cure for depression. You believe cutting out sugar and eating more kale will reset your brain chemistry? The multi-billion-dollar diet industry and holistic wellness blogs promise that gut health is the ultimate exclusive key to mental health. While the gut-brain axis is real, diet alone cannot override severe genetic predispositions, trauma, or structural brain changes associated with chronic depression. Improving nutrition can reduce systemic inflammation and support overall health, but equating a vegetable smoothie with psychiatric intervention is dangerously reductive. This myth exploded when the wellness industry realized they could co-opt emerging and often preliminary microbiome research to sell extremely expensive probiotics. Turns out, a salad is a great lunch, but it's a terrible replacement for an SSRI. 12. You've been told that if you aren't suicidal, you aren't truly depressed. You believe that the only valid form of depression is the one that puts you in immediate mortal danger. Insurance companies, triage nurses, and societal empathy often operate on this exact threshold. The vast majority of people suffering from clinical depression do not actively wish to end their lives. They simply wish to escape their current state of existence. Passive suicidal ideation, the feeling of, "I wouldn't mind if I didn't wake up," is incredibly common, yet distinct from having an active plan, and treating only the latter leaves millions suffering in silence. Emergency rooms and crisis systems were built for immediate triage, which inadvertently trained the public to only recognize mental illness when it reaches a catastrophic boiling point. So, you don't have to be on the edge of a cliff to prove you're stuck in a very dark hole. 13. You've been told depression is just a fancy word for laziness. You believe that staying in bed all day is a character flaw masquerading as a medical issue. Toxic productivity culture and demanding employers view any drop in output as an intentional choice to slack off. Depression actively depletes the brain's supply of dopamine, the neurotransmitter entirely responsible for motivation, reward, and the physical initiation of movement. When a depressed person cannot get out of bed, it is often due to a literal neurochemical roadblock, preventing their brain from sending the necessary go signals to their muscles. the Industrial Revolution created a society that valued humans strictly by their labor output, permanently branding any lack of productivity as a moral failure. Turns out, they aren't choosing to be lazy. Their brain's ignition switch has literally been unhooked. 14. You've been told depression is primarily a women's issue. You believe that men rarely get depressed, and if they do, it's an anomaly. Historical medical textbooks and modern pop psychology have framed emotional struggles as inherently feminine. Men experience depression at staggering rates, but it frequently presents as aggression, substance abuse, reckless behavior, and chronic anger, rather than classic tearfulness. Because diagnostic criteria were originally modeled around how women openly express distress, millions of men fall through the cracks of the medical system, leading to massively disproportionate male suicide rates. The Victorian era's sexist invention of hysteria firmly linked emotional instability to womanhood, a toxic legacy that continues to blind doctors to male suffering today. So, men aren't immune to depression. They've just been taught to disguise it as rage. 15. You've been told that one good therapy session will fix you. You believe that uncovering one hidden childhood memory will instantly cure your symptoms. Hollywood depictions of therapy, like Good Will Hunting, always end with a single tearful breakthrough that solves everything forever. Therapy is a grueling, non-linear process of slowly rewiring behavioral patterns and coping mechanisms over months or years. It is much closer to physical therapy for a chronic injury than it is to a sudden, magical revelation. The media relies on narrative arcs that require quick resolutions, forcing scriptwriters to condense years of psychological work into a tidy 90-minute movie plot. Turns out, fixing your brain takes a lot more work than just crying on a leather couch for an hour. 16. You've been told that if you start antidepressants, you'll be on them forever. You believe that taking medication is a permanent life sentence of dependency. Fear-mongering natural health advocates and anxious relatives constantly warn about the addictive nature of psychiatric drugs. For many people, antidepressants are used as a temporary scaffolding, often 6 to 12 months, to stabilize the brain long enough for therapy and lifestyle changes to take effect, after which they are successfully tapered off. While some do need long-term medication for chronic conditions, SSRIs are not chemically addictive in the way narcotics are. This fear stems from early pharmaceutical marketing that didn't properly educate the public on the difference between physical dependence and necessary medical management. So, taking a pill doesn't mean you're chained to it. Sometimes it just means you needed a temporary cast for a broken mind. 17. You've been told St. John's wort and essential oils are safer than prescribed medication. You believe that because something is natural, it comes without risks or side effects. The multi-billion-dollar supplement industry heavily markets natural remedies as harmless alternatives to toxic big pharma. Natural supplements are virtually unregulated, can cause severe liver toxicity, and St. John's wort specifically interacts dangerously with dozens of vital medications, including birth control and blood thinners. The supplement industry aggressively lobbied the U.S. government in the 1990s, resulting in the DSHEA Act, to ensure their products didn't have to prove safety or efficacy like real medicines do. Turns out, cyanide is also 100% natural, and your lavender oil isn't a substitute for a medical degree. 18. You've been told that only people in Western countries get depressed. You believe that depression is a luxury of rich nations and doesn't exist in the developing world. Ignorant travel bloggers and ethnocentric commentators often claim that people in poorer countries are too busy surviving to be sad. The World Health Organization clearly documents depression as a leading cause of disability globally, affecting all nations, but it is heavily underdiagnosed in developing areas due to extreme stigma and a lack of psychiatric infrastructure. In many cultures, psychological distress is expressed entirely through physical symptoms like stomach aches or fatigue, somatization, meaning Western doctors simply failed to recognize it. The colonial mindset of early psychiatry assumed Western minds were uniquely complex, completely invalidating the emotional reality of billions of people. So, depression is universal. We just suck at recognizing it when it speaks a different language. 19. You've been told rich, successful people don't get depressed. You believe that money, fame, and success act as a shield against mental illness. Tabloid magazines and societal jealousy constantly suggest that celebrities have no right to be unhappy. Wealth and status provide better access to treatment, but they do absolutely nothing to immunize the brain's neurobiology against the onset of a mood disorder. In fact, extreme success can sometimes exacerbate isolation and create massive imposter syndrome, stripping away the illusion that achieving goals will finally bring peace. Our capitalist society operates on the core promise that money buys happiness, making the existence of a miserable billionaire deeply uncomfortable for the general public to process. Turns out, a broken serotonin receptor works exactly the same on a yacht as it does in a studio apartment. 20. You've been told that getting some sunlight will instantly cure your mood. You believe a sunny day is the ultimate antidote to a depressive episode. Well-meaning relatives and cheerful morning shows constantly prescribe getting outside as the ultimate fix. While sunlight helps regulate circadian rhythms and vitamin D, it is incapable of reversing a major depressive episode involving deep structural brain changes. For someone trapped in the agonizing numbness of anhedonia, a sunny day often makes them feel worse, highlighting the painful contrast between the bright world and their dark internal reality. This myth overextrapolates the data on seasonal affective disorder, SAD, falsely applying a specific light-based treatment to all forms of clinical depression. So, the sun is great for plants, but you are a complex mammal who occasionally needs actual medicine. 21. You've been told you must have childhood trauma to be depressed. You believe that if you had great parents, you have no excuse for your mental illness. Armchair psychologists and the endless true crime podcast boom have convinced everyone that all mental issues stem from dark childhood secrets. While trauma is a massive risk factor, a huge percentage of depression cases have strong genetic components or are triggered by physical illnesses, hormonal shifts, or chronic stress in adulthood, with zero childhood trauma present. Psychoanalysis heavily dominated 20th century psychiatry, forcing doctors to obsessively dig for childhood wounds even when the patient's brain was simply misfiring genetically. Turns out, your parents can be perfect, your childhood can be idyllic, and your brain can still decide to short-circuit. 22. You've been told that depression makes you a creative genius. You believe that to be a great artist, musician, or writer, you must be deeply tormented. Pop culture romanticizes the tortured artist trope, from Vincent van Gogh to Kurt Cobain. Depression is fundamentally debilitating. It destroys executive function, ruins focus, and drains the energy required to actually create art. While artists may draw on their past experiences of pain, their most productive and brilliant work usually occurs during periods of recovery or stability, not in the depths of a depressive episode. The media heavily skewed this narrative by only focusing on famous artists after they died, confusing the illness that killed them with the talent that made them famous. So, Depression isn't your muse. It's the parasite eating your muse alive. 23. You've been told you just need a vacation. You believe that a week on a beach will reset your entire psychological state. Burnout culture and travel influencers market vacations as the ultimate cure for systemic exhaustion and sadness. Changing your geography does not change your brain chemistry. You simply take your depression with you, often feeling worse because the relaxing environment fails to fix the internal agony. A vacation treats acute stress, but clinical depression is a systemic internal collapse that doesn't care if you're looking at an Excel sheet or the ocean. The tourism industry highly benefits from the narrative that your mental health can be fixed with a hotel booking and a margarita. Turns out, your depression packs its bags and flies first class right alongside you. 24. You've been told depression is just a form of attention-seeking. You believe that people who are depressed are just being dramatic for sympathy. Cynical peers and toxic family dynamics frequently frame vulnerability as a manipulative tactic. The defining characteristic of severe depression is overwhelming shame and a desperate desire to hide the illness, not broadcast it. The vast majority of sufferers expend massive amounts of energy trying to appear normal so they don't burden the people around them. This myth stems from a cultural inability to differentiate between teenage angst, which is developmentally normal, and the crushing isolation of clinical disease. So, they aren't faking it for attention. They are likely faking being okay so you'll leave them alone. 25. You've been told group therapy is basically a sad cult. You believe it's just a circle of people trauma dumping and making each other worse. Sitcoms and bad movies portray group therapy as a pathetic gathering of broken people sitting on uncomfortable folding chairs. Structured group therapy is actually one of the most effective, evidence-based treatments available because it shatters the core symptom of depression: the absolute conviction that you are entirely alone in your suffering. By engaging in controlled, peer-based accountability, patients challenge their own cognitive distortions faster than they would in isolation. Hollywood leans on the sad circle trope because it's a cheap visual shorthand for weakness, entirely misrepresenting the clinical rigor of group dynamics. Turns out, healing in a community isn't a cult. It's just the evolutionary antidote to isolation. 26. You've been told depression is exactly the same as grief. You believe that losing a loved one and clinical depression are biologically identical. Hallmark cards, bereavement groups, and general society often use the words interchangeably. While grief can trigger depression, grief is characterized by waves of pain mixed with positive memories, whereas depression is a flat, persistent void where self-esteem is fundamentally destroyed. Grief is the brain processing a loss of someone else. Depression is the brain processing a loss of the self. For decades, the DSM, Psychiatry's Diagnostic Manual, had a bereavement exclusion that confused the medical community, making it harder for doctors to separate a normal mourning process from a clinical psychiatric emergency. So, grief is paying the price for love, but depression is just a thief that steals your identity. 27. You've been told depression only strikes in the dark, cold days of winter. You believe that summer makes everyone naturally immune to severe mood drops. The overwhelming media focus on seasonal affective disorder, SAD, has convinced the public that warm weather guarantees a warm mood. A highly disruptive, agitated form of depression actually peaks for many individuals in the spring and early summer, correlating with higher rates of suicide during the warmer, sunnier months. The stark contrast between a person's dark internal state And the joyful, vibrant world outside can actually deepen feelings of isolation and despair. News outlets love a simple winter blues story because it ties neatly to the weather forecast, ignoring the complex year-round reality of the disease. Turns out, depression doesn't own a calendar, and it definitely doesn't take the summer off. 28. You've been told getting married or finding a partner will fix depression. You believe that true love is the ultimate cure for a broken mind. Fairy tales, romantic comedies, and societal pressures insist that finding your person completes you and erases your sadness. A romantic relationship cannot cure a neurobiological disorder, and relying on a partner to be your sole psychiatric intervention is a guaranteed recipe for toxic codependency and resentment. While supportive relationships improve overall health, expecting love to replace medication or therapy puts an impossible, unfair burden on the partner. Our culture is obsessed with the myth of the savior, pushing the dangerous narrative that another human being can love you out of a chemical deficit. So, a partner is a teammate, not a pharmacy. 29. You've been told meditation is a perfect replacement for antidepressants. You believe that if you just sit quietly and breathe, you can cure a clinical mood disorder. Silicon Valley wellness bros and highly monetized mindfulness apps heavily market meditation as the ultimate alternative to Western medicine. While mindfulness is a fantastic preventative tool and adjunct therapy, prescribing it to someone in the depths of severe depression can actually be dangerous, as it forces them to sit alone with overwhelming, unmanaged suicidal thoughts. The mindfulness boom stripped Eastern religious practices of their context, packaged them into $9.99-month subscriptions, and oversold them as a medical cure-all to stressed-out corporate workers. Turns out, breathing exercises are great, but they can't magically reconstruct a damaged hippocampus. 30. You've been told depression frequently causes violent, dangerous behavior. You believe that deeply depressed people are a physical threat to society. True crime documentaries and sloppy news reporting frequently conflate depression with psychopathy or severe psychosis after violent tragedies. People with depression are statistically far more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators of it. The primary threat a depressed person poses is almost exclusively directed inward toward themselves, not outward toward the public. Media outlets routinely use history of depression as a sensational buzzword when covering violent crimes, unfairly stigmatizing millions of peaceful people to generate clicks. So, the only person a depressed person is likely to hurt is themselves. 31. You've been told that having a baby cures depression, or that postpartum is the only kind of depression mothers get. You believe that the joy of motherhood overrides all previous mental health struggles. The glow of motherhood myth is pushed relentlessly by parenting magazines and societal expectations of feminine duty. Pregnancy and childbirth cause massive hormonal shifts and extreme sleep deprivation, making women with a history of depression highly vulnerable to severe relapses during and after pregnancy, not magically cured. The historical medical establishment idealized motherhood to the point of clinical blindness, assuming the miracle of life was a sufficient shield against psychiatric illness. Turns out, a baby brings a lot of joy, but it also brings a massive stress test to an already fragile nervous system. 32. You've been told depressed people are always pessimistic and negative. You believe that they are the ultimate Debbie Downers who ruin every party. The cultural stereotype is that depressed individuals constantly complain and see the worst in every situation. Depressive realism is a documented psychological phenomenon where mildly depressed people actually assess risks and realities more accurately than non-depressed people, who generally operate with an optimistic bias. Furthermore, many severely depressed people are masterfully funny and outwardly positive, using humor as a defense mechanism to deflect attention from their pain. Society loves simple binaries. Happy means good, sad means negative, ignoring the incredible emotional intelligence many depressed people develop to survive. So, they aren't always pessimistic. Sometimes they're just the only ones seeing the world accurately. 33. You've been told that depression causes permanent, irreversible brain damage. You believe that once you've had a severe episode, your cognitive abilities are ruined forever. Sensationalized science journalism often misinterprets brain scan studies, reporting that depression rots the brain. The human brain is incredibly plastic, and studies show that with effective treatment, including medication, therapy, and lifestyle changes, the hippocampus can actually regenerate and regain its volume, restoring memory and cognitive function. Science writers looking for terrifying headlines often highlight the damage, while completely ignoring the extensive data on recovery and neurogenesis. Turns out, your brain might have taken a beating, but it is entirely capable of rebuilding the house. 34. You've been told that getting a pet is a foolproof cure for depression. You believe a puppy or kitten provides all the emotional support needed to heal. Viral internet culture and well-meaning friends heavily romanticize the healing power of fur babies. While pets offer great companionship, the reality of caring for an animal, the financial burden, the early mornings, the training, can severely overwhelm someone whose executive dysfunction already makes it hard to care for themselves. When an individual is struggling to brush their own teeth, adding the responsibility of keeping another living creature alive can trigger massive guilt and deepen the depressive episode. The internet thrives on cute animal content, completely erasing the unglamorous, exhausting reality of pet ownership. So, a dog is a wonderful friend, but it is a terrible substitute for a doctor. 35. You've been told that real depression always requires hospitalization. You believe that if you aren't in a psychiatric ward, your symptoms aren't valid. The extreme ends of the medical spectrum, dramatized in movies like Girl, Interrupted, set an artificially high bar for what constitutes mental illness. Millions of people live with dysthymia, persistent depressive disorder, enduring a low-grade, exhausting depression for decades, while holding down jobs, raising families, and never once setting foot in a hospital. Because healthcare systems are chronically underfunded, they only intervene at the point of catastrophic crisis, teaching society to ignore the quiet suffering of the highly functional majority. Turns out, you don't need a hospital bracelet to prove you are fighting for your life every single day. 36. You've been told depression is contagious. You believe that if you spend too much time around a depressed person, you'll catch their sadness. People often distance themselves from suffering friends under the guise of protecting their own energy. Depression is a non-communicable neurobiological and psychological condition. You cannot catch a neurotransmitter deficit or a trauma response by sitting next to someone on a couch. What people are actually feeling is empathy fatigue, the exhausting reality of caring for someone who is sick, which they mistakenly label as catching the depression. Self-help culture has highly weaponized the idea of toxic people, encouraging the abandonment of sick friends in the name of personal optimization. So, your friend's depression isn't a virus, but your lack of loyalty is definitely a choice. 37. You've been told you can't be a good parent while severely depressed. You believe that struggling with mental illness automatically traumatizes your children and ruins their lives. Mom shamers, internet forums, and societal perfectionism create immense guilt for parents managing mood disorders. Children are highly resilient, and a parent who models how to actively manage an illness, seek help, and apologize for bad days actually teaches their children vital emotional regulation and profound empathy. The myth of the perfect parent is a modern invention designed to sell parenting books and generate anxiety, ignoring the fact that historically, children were raised by imperfect villages, not flawless individuals. Turns out, you don't have to be perfect to be a good parent. You just have to keep trying. 38. You've been told that relapsing means you failed. You believe that if your depression comes back after years of stability, all your progress was fake. The linear hero's journey narrative demands that once a dragon is slain, it never returns. Depression is overwhelmingly a cyclical, chronic condition. Relapses are a completely normal part of the disease process, not an erasure of the tools and resilience you built during your healthy periods. Our medical model treats illness like an acute infection. Take a pill, kill the bug, end of story, and deeply struggles to accommodate diseases that ebb and flow over a lifetime. So, a relapse isn't a return to square one. It's just a reminder to pick up the tools you already know how to use. 39. You've been told that alternative medicine gurus hold the real secret to curing depression. You believe that underground shamans or expensive retreats have the cure that Big Pharma is hiding. Desperate patients often fall prey to charismatic influencers selling ayahuasca retreats or quantum energy healing. While some alternative practices, like guided psilocybin, are showing promise in clinical trials, the unregulated wellness industry is rife with grifters who weaponize the very real flaws of the psychiatric system to sell you a $5,000 spiritual bypass. The legitimate failures and side effects of modern psychiatry created a massive vulnerability, which snake oil salesmen gleefully exploit under the guise of ancient wisdom. Turns out, swapping a pharmaceutical corporation for a greedy wellness guru isn't rebellion. It's just a different way to get scammed. 40. You've been told time heals all wounds. You believe that if you just wait long enough, the depression will eventually fade away on its own. Cliché idioms and avoidant personalities rely heavily on the passive passing of time to fix active medical problems. Untreated clinical depression actually worsens over time, strengthening negative neural pathways and increasing the risk of subsequent, more severe episodes, effectively teaching the brain how to be more depressed. Time does absolutely nothing without active intervention. It is the therapy, medication, and behavioral changes executed during that time that actually heal the wound. The concept of time as a healer is a comforting, poetic lie we tell ourselves to avoid doing the terrifying, exhausting work of active recovery. So, time doesn't heal a damn thing. It just leaves the scar tissue completely untreated. 41. You've been told that curing depression is the ultimate goal. You believe that one day you'll cross a finish line, put down the medications, and never look back. The entire medical model and the self-help publishing industry sell the promise of a permanent, shiny cure. For many, depression is a chronic, lifelong condition that requires management, not a temporary infection that gets cured. The goal is building resilience and a toolkit for survival, knowing that relapses are a normal part of the disease's life cycle, not a personal failure. Healthcare systems are designed to treat acute issues, fix the broken bone, kill the bacteria, so they falsely applied this same linear fix-it framework to a chronic neurobiological condition. Turns out, you aren't a broken machine waiting to be fixed. You're just learning how to sail a ship that occasionally leaks. 42. You've been told the mental health crisis is entirely an individual medical failing. You believe that the massive spike in global depression rates is just bad genetics catching up with us. Governments, corporations, and the healthcare industry push the narrative that if you're depressed, the problem is entirely inside your own head. Our modern epidemic of depression is largely a rational biological response to an increasingly isolating, overworked, financially unstable, and hyper-connected society. We are treating the symptoms of a sick society by medicating the individual. It is infinitely cheaper and less disruptive for powerful institutions to prescribe you a pill than it is to fix poverty, rebuild community infrastructure, or mandate a living wage. So, maybe your brain isn't broken. Maybe it's just having a perfectly normal reaction to a world that's lost its mind. The system was built to individualize our pain, to sell us neat chemical metaphors, and to profit off our endless search for a magic cure. But understanding the actual mechanics of depression and the forces that benefit from our misunderstanding is the first real step toward taking your mind back. Drop the depression myth I didn't cover down in the comments below. If this changed how you look at mental health, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the lies we've been sold. Remember, you aren't weak, you aren't broken, and you certainly aren't alone.